Welcome back to the FBS podcast. For today's deep dive in our climate adaptation series, we're focusing on something that should be pretty familiar to everybody in the forest products world. Vermont's acceptable management practices. AMPs. We all know how important AMPs are for protecting water quality. And today, we're going to explore a new, innovative way to implement those practices out in the field, the Vermont AMP app. I'm excited to be joined today by our expert, who have a lot of great insights on how technology can help make our forestry practices more efficient and environmentally sound.
Thanks for having me.
So, let's dive right in. Could you give us a little background on Vermont's AMPs and how this app came about?
Sure. Vermont's AMPs have been around for a while now, since the 1980s. But they got a pretty big update in 2018. And the interesting thing about that update is that they decided to separate the actual rules from the supporting information manual. So what that means is that the manual can be updated really easily without having to go through the whole process of changing the rules. And that's where the app comes in. It gives you digital access to that manual right on your phone, along with a bunch of other useful tools for foresters.
That's a really interesting approach. Sounds like this app would be a real game changer for how we access and use those AMPs.
Yeah.
So what are some of the key features that really stand out to you?
Well, having that entire AMP manual searchable right on your phone is pretty convenient. I think we've all been there, flipping through pages out in the field, trying to find what we need. But I think what really makes this app shine is the job details with mapping feature. You can actually create maps of your job sites, drop pins to mark specific AMP features like culverts or water bars, and you can even record details about each of those features. You know, that kind of on-site documentation and planning is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that would be really handy, especially when you're working on a large site or complex site. And I'm also seeing here that the app has a cost calculator. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, the AMP cost calculator is all about transparency and making informed decisions. It helps you estimate the cost of implementing AMPs for a specific job, and it gets pretty granular. It breaks down those costs, but material, labor, and even machine time. Having that kind of detailed breakdown can be really useful for bidding on jobs accurately and for making sure we're accurately representing the financial investment required for responsible forestry.
I imagine that'd be really helpful in conversations with clients. You know, it's one thing to talk about the importance of AMPs, but to actually show them the costs involved can make it much more real.
Exactly. It brings that financial element to the forefront and helps everyone understand the true value of sustainable forestry.
Okay. So we've got the searchable manual, we've got the mapping feature, the cost calculator. What other tools are tucked away in this app?
Well, there's also a direct link to the UC Davis soil web. I know that might not seem that exciting at first, but understanding soil types is absolutely essential for choosing the right AMPs. You know, different soils have different drainage characteristics and different erosion potentials, and those factors really influence how we need to implement these practices.
That makes a lot of sense. It's really smart to have that soil data readily available right there in the app.
So we're talking about a lot of digital tools here. What about working in areas with limited cell service? How does the app handle that? That's a great question, and something the developers definitely thought about. Most of the app's functions actually work offline, so you can still access the AMP manual, review your job details, and even use the clinometer, however. Creating new maps or accessing the soil web does require a connection, so downloading maps ahead of time is crucial for offline use.
So it sounds like a little pre-planning can go a long way.
Yeah.
Especially if you know you're going to be heading into an area with spotty cell service.
And speaking of those mapping features, are there any limitations to how they work? I know technology isn't perfect.
Well, there are a couple of areas where the mapping functionality could be improved. Right now, you can't actually trace trails directly on the map. You have to manually drop pins to mark AMP features along a trail, which can be a little time-consuming. It also doesn't currently integrate with other mapping apps, like Avenza, which I know a lot of foresters use. Yeah, it seems like those would be valuable additions for future updates. But overall, it sounds like this app is a really powerful tool.
Especially intrigued by that clinometer feature. Can you explain how that works and why it's so important?
So the clinometer is a really neat feature that utilizes your phone's camera to measure the slope of the terrain. And this is really essential for determining the proper placement and design of many AMPs. For example, spacing of water bars on a trail, or the type of culvert that you need is influenced by the slope. So getting accurate slope readings means better AMP placement, which in turn minimizes erosion and helps to protect water
I can
globally.
see how that level of precision would be really helpful. I know a lot of us rely on, the traditional clinometers, but
Yeah.
having that data integrated directly into the app seems like a major step forward. It's not just a digital level, it's a way to connect that slope data to your AMP planning
Yeah.
right there in the field.
So, we've talked a lot about the app's features and how they can be used to implement AMPs effectively. But I kind of want to shift gears for a moment and think about the bigger picture. Here at the Forest Business School, our mission is to support mid-career professionals in the forest products industry. And it seems like this app could be a really valuable tool for showcasing the environmental and economic value of those sustainable forestry practices to their clients.
Absolutely. One of the things I find most exciting about this app is its potential to really change the conversation around sustainable forestry. For too long, AMPs have been seen as just another regulation,
Yeah.
a box to check. But with this app, foresters can actually track the location and the cost of each AMP, and they can provide concrete data. That demonstrates the real investment being made to protect water quality during a timber harvest.
It's like a built-in transparency tool. Instead of just telling clients about AMPs, you can actually show them what's being done and how much it costs. Exactly. It takes those AMPs from being abstract regulations to tangible actions with real costs and benefits, and that can be really powerful when it comes to communicating the value of sustainable forestry to clients.
I can see that being a real game changer, especially as consumers become more and more interested in the sustainability of the products they buy.
Absolutely. And it's not just about consumers either. This kind of data can also be used to advocate for policies that support sustainable forestry. We can use it to show policymakers the economic viability of these practices and to make the case for incentives or programs that encourage responsible forest management.
It's about moving beyond those generalizations
Yeah.
and getting into the specifics,
Yeah.
showing the data,
Yeah.
the costs, the benefits, and making a strong case for why sustainable forestry matters.
Exactly.
Now, I want to make sure we're being balanced here. We've talked a lot about the positives of this app, but are there any potential drawbacks or criticisms that we should consider?
That's a good question. I think one potential concern is that people might become overly reliant on the app. It's important to remember that this is a tool to support decision-making, not to replace a forester's professional judgment and experience.
It's about using technology thoughtfully, not blindly.
Right. We also have to be mindful of the potential for increased documentation burdens. Some foresters might worry that the app is going to create more paperwork, but
Yeah.
I would argue that it actually streamlines that process. It consolidates information that might have been scattered across notebooks or spreadsheets and makes it easier to track and manage. And we can't forget that this app is completely free, and in itself removes a barrier for a lot of foresters who might not have the resources to invest in expensive software or mapping tools.
Okay, that's a really important point. So let's say our listener is convinced and wants to try out this app. Where can they find it? And what advice would you give them as they start exploring?
Well, it's easy to find. Just search Vermont AMP in the App Store or Google Play. As for advice, I would say, don't be intimidated. The app is designed to be user-friendly, even if you're not a tech expert. Take some time to explore each feature. Play around with it. There are also tutorials and FAQs within the app itself.
That's great to know. It's always helpful to have those resources available,
Yeah.
especially when you're trying out a new tool.
Absolutely. And as you start using it out in the field, remember those tips we talked about earlier? Download maps ahead of time if you're heading into an area with limited cell service.
Right. That's crucial. Any other advice before we wrap up?
Just remember, the app is a tool to help you work smarter, not harder.
It's all about working smarter and more sustainably. So, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the history of Vermont's AMPs to the details of this really innovative app. As we wrap up, I want to circle back to that bigger picture question we touched on earlier. How can this app, with its ability to track the location and the cost of each AMP, be used to really showcase the value of sustainable forestry to clients and even to policymakers?
That's the key question, isn't it? I truly believe this app has the potential to transform how we communicate about sustainable forestry. Imagine being able to present data that shows the precise cost of every water bar, every culvert, every measure taken to protect water quality. That's a powerful story to tell.
It takes it from, a theoretical discussion,
Yeah.
a concrete demonstration of the investments being made.
Right, and that data can be aggregated, analyzed,
Yeah.
and used to build a compelling case for the economic viability of sustainable forestry. We can move beyond just talking about the importance of these practices and actually show that they contribute to long-term economic sustainability.
It's about Shifting that mindset from viewing AMPs as a regulatory burden to seeing them as a smart investment in the future of our forests and our industry.
Absolutely. I think this app has the potential to be a real game changer, not just for how we implement AMPs, but for how we communicate the value of sustainable forestry to the world.
Yeah, and that's something we can all get behind. So to all of you listening, we encourage you to download the Vermont AMP app and explore its features. It's a free and incredibly valuable tool for anyone involved in forestry in Vermont. And remember, the Forest Business School is here to support your professional growth and to help you navigate the ever-evolving world of sustainable forestry. Be sure to check out other episodes in our Climate Adaptation series for more insights and resources. Thanks for joining us today for this deep dive into the Vermont AMP app.
Hey, this is Steve Bick with the Forest Business School. Thanks for listening to the FBS podcast, and I hope you will subscribe. The truth is, these deep dives barely scratch the surface of some of the topics we cover in the Forest Business School programs, and the podcast is a way of reaching a wider audience. Check out my website at vtfbs.com for more information. Reach out if you want to talk about one of the FBS programs or have custom training or project needs that you'd like to discuss. Again, thanks for listening to the FBS podcast.